And there will be a 20th anniversary celebration for Randy Orton. Randy Orton debuted on WWE television 20 years ago tomorrow, to the day of the show tomorrow. He debuted with a win over Hardcore Holly on SmackDown. Orton has had a very charmed career. You know, even through a lot of the immature fits that he threw in his younger days, that would have gotten most other people fired. Because of who he was, though, and how much they had invested in him, he got a second chance and a third chance. Remember, years ago, the Orton Rule. They had changed, very quietly, WWE changed the rules of the wellness policy to allow Randy Orton to remove one of the strikes that he had, because they had the rule, I think it was like a 3 strikes and you're out thing, where you could be terminated after a certain number of strikes against you. He had 2, and they changed the policy very quietly, very subtly, to allow Orton to remove one of his strikes, because they didn't want to have to fire him. So he had enough people in his corner to kind of protect him in situations like that. But today, he's a family man. He's matured as he's gotten older. He looks like he's having the time of his life out there with Riddle, you know, doing the RK Bro thing. When you talk about Randy Orton as part of evolution, we've witnessed the evolution of Randy Orton over the last 20 years. We've seen it with our own eyes. You know, Orton had and still does, you know, had the physical gifts that most wrestlers would kill to have. You know, his timing in the ring. He wasn't the flashiest guy. He was never all that interesting on promos. But in the ring, he was always very good. You know, Orton was never the guy in WWE. I think they imagined that one day he would be, but he never was, because they had John Cena. You know, at first it was Cena and Batista. And Batista was the one who got over bigger when Evolution split apart. But Cena was always positioned as the real top guy in the company. Orton had his moments, as did Edge and Jeff Hardy for a bit, but I can't look back and ever say this was the Randy Orton era, or that was the Randy Orton era. But he has been a consistent, either at the top or near the top of the card, presence in this company now for 2 decades. When I try to think of others who would make that list, it's a very short list. I think of The Undertaker and maybe Triple H, and that's it. And Triple H has been mostly part-time in the ring since 2011. He's held every major accolade there is to hold: WWE Champion, World Heavyweight Champion, Intercontinental Champion, United States Champion, Tag Team Champion, 2-time Royal Rumble winner, Money in the Bank winner. Orton has always been a weird one for me, because there are times where he's duller than dishwater over the years. But then he would go on this run where he was incredibly over. He's much more natural as a heel than he is as a babyface. But when he's over as a babyface, the people absolutely love him. And he was blessed with that RKO finish, which is such a great move. I mean, he can hit it from out of nowhere, from any position. It looks great. So he's gone through these up and down periods. I remember after the Legacy split, coming out of WrestleMania 26, I don't know that he's ever been as over with the audience as he was in those couple of months coming out of that show. Legacy did more to get Orton over than it did Cody Rhodes or Ted DiBiase. And when all is said and done, he may wind up doing it longer than anybody else. You know, he's still only 42. He said that he's just reaching his prime. And he's got a long ways yet to go. If he can stay healthy, there's no reason to think that he won't get there. But I was thinking of what my top 5 Randy Orton matches would look like. I don't think I have enough to stretch this to a top 10. If I had to, I probably could stretch it. But like, I'm talking about the Randy Orton matches I really loved, right? I don't think I can... It's a lot easier to do a top 5 or 6 or 7 for me. Than it would a top 10. Now, I actually came up with 7, but I'm going to lump some of them together because they came against the same opponent. So I'm calling it a top 5. This is what my Randy Orton top 5 would look like, and this is not in any particular order. You are not going to find very many pandemic-era matches on any top 5 or top 10 lists of mine. This is one of those rare exceptions. The match didn't even air live. They pre-taped it days earlier, but it was at the Performance Center. It was Randy Orton against Edge at Backlash 2020 in a match that they promoted as the greatest wrestling match of all time. It wasn't, but it was pretty damn great, and it was much better than their last man standing match at WrestleMania that year. They paid homage to wrestling of the past with different spots that they did, and they had a small audience there. I think it was wrestlers and internal staff, but what they did, it worked. It clicked. And I enjoyed that match it's unfortunate that Edge got hurt later in the match. That's when he tore his triceps, but I enjoyed the match very much. The two matches that Evolution had with The Shield at the Extreme Rules and Payback pay-per-views in 2014. Again, I'm going to lump the two of them together as one because they were both great. It's hard to choose between them. I loved The Shield. I was a huge fan of The Shield, one of the greatest groups in WWE history. I love The Shield more than I ever did Evolution. But those three guys, Blutista included, they went out there and they did their damnedest to get Rollins, Reigns, and Ambrose over as babyfaces. After The Shield turned, coming out of WrestleMania 30. Even though it was 3-on-3, I think you could have made that second match a War Games match. And it would have worked. The triple threat match, speaking of WrestleMania 30, with Randy Orton defending the championship against Batista and Daniel Bryan. That WrestleMania was all about the Daniel Bryan story. It was supposed to be Orton one-on-one with Batista. But the fans revolted. And it was for the best, because as much as it was about the story and Bryan winning the title, the three of them, they went out there and they had an excellent match. And that's not always easy to do in these multi-man matches, but I thought that was one of the better triple threat matches that you will ever see in WWE. John Cena and CM Punk probably had my favorite match of 2011 at Money in the Bank that year. But Randy Orton and Christian win for Best Feud. Every single match those two had together that year was great. None better than the matches they had at Over the Limit for the World Heavyweight title and their no-holds-barred match at SummerSlam. Their Money in the Bank match was probably the weakest out of all of them, and even that one was still very good. I remember being so upset with how they jobbed out Christian 2 days after he won the world title for the first time, because they used to tape SmackDown earlier in the week. So even though it aired 5 days later, it was really 48 hours later. He wins the championship, then he immediately drops it to Randy Orton. And I remember just being so upset with how they jobbed this guy out. But that is one example of how letting things play out actually paid off in the end. It's rare these days. It doesn't happen very often. But it does happen from time to time, and this was one of those times. And they got a story out of it that took them all the way through the summer. And we ended up getting a lot of great matches between those two. But again, none better than, I think, the Over the Limit match and then their no-holds-barred match at SummerSlam. I thought that was great. And then there's the match that made a believer out of a lot of people when it came to Randy Orton. The match that put him on the map in the way that Mick Foley did for Triple H at the Royal Rumble in 2000. He did the same for Randy Orton at Backlash in 2004. Foley was very giving when it came to getting over other people, maybe more than he should have been, right down to him telling Orton to punch him in the face for real on TV just to make it look as authentic as possible. Like Triple H in the street fight with Cactus Jack, Orton took a lot of abuse in that match to make him appear tougher than he had been portrayed up to that point. Everybody remembers the bump on the thumbtacks. I remember Foley throwing him off the stage and then immediately diving off onto Orton in the rubble. It was the most violent Intercontinental title match of all time. And the match that I think of the most when I look back on Randy Orton's career. I come back to that Backlash match in 2004. But Orton's biggest feuds in WWE were against two people, John Cena and Triple H. He's had good matches with both of them, even though none of them make my top 5. So it's interesting that I say that Cena and Orton were his greatest rivals, or Cena and Triple H rather. were his greatest rivals because, again, I didn't mention any of their matches in this list. But John Cena is the guy that Randy Orton is most linked with. Orton is not Cena's greatest rival. That would be either Edge or CM Punk. For Orton, though, it has to be Triple H or John Cena. The number of matches that Orton and Cena have had over the years had me begging to never see them in the ring ever again. Kind of the way I feel now about Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar. If I never see those two in the ring together again, I would be perfectly content. Orton and Cena, though, I mean, we remember the one time on Monday Night Raw where they were actually tag team partners for the handicap match. It was 17-on-2, and they wiped out the entire Raw roster. Remember that? But they had countless matches against each other on Raw. They had at least one that I remember on SmackDown. Royal Rumble, SummerSlam, Breaking Point, Bragging Rights. I always liked the Iron Man match they had on that show. Hell in a Cell, TLC, when they had that unification match in 2013. Unforgiven, No Way Out. All these matches, all these pay-per-views, all these Raws, and yet it's hard to believe the two of them never had a singles match at WrestleMania. There was a triple threat at 24, but that's as close as they ever came. And I think that in the next few years, if they want to have a real attraction to WrestleMania, John Cena is just one more title win away. He's already tied Ric Flair's record. He's only one title win away from breaking Ric Flair's record of 16 world titles. He's had more than that. Flair himself has said that he thinks the number is 21. Some people have said 23. 16 is the number that WWE goes by and they recognize, so that's the number we'll use. But Cena is only one win away from 17. Randy Orton is right behind him. He's nipping at his heels. He's got 14 world titles. So he would need to win the title 2 more times to tie John Cena. Even I, as someone who was sick to death of seeing John Cena against Randy Orton and cringed whenever Michael Cole would go on about how, it's a classic rivalry. And I used to always say, just because somebody has wrestled somebody else 50,000 times, quantity does not equal quantity. This is not some classic feud in the same vein that other classic feuds we've seen in WWE history. But that's what he would always be told to say. You gotta call it a classic. You gotta call it a classic. And it just got to the point where I just wanted to see anything but these two men in the ring together ever again. Even I would acknowledge that if they can work out a scenario where the title or titles are vacant, let's be honest, these titles aren't going to be unified by that point. And I'm not sure how you get there. I'm not sure how you get to that scenario where the title is vacant and then these two are the ones challenging for it in this particular example. But it's wrestling, so you can always make something doable. Even I would acknowledge that John Cena against Randy Orton, 16 titles apiece, one-on-one, for the first time ever at WrestleMania, for the right to break the record and become the first ever 17-time world champion, would be a hell of an attraction. The Undertaker's streak was an attraction that's long been broken. Stone Cold Steve Austin, the idea of him coming out of retirement for one final match, I never thought we would see the day. We got it this year at WrestleMania. It's done. The Rock might just come back next year to wrestle Roman Reigns. 50-50. That would be the biggest attraction they could do. After that, they don't have any real attractions. I mean, I'm all for focusing on your current talent and not just throwing the old guys out there. But the race to 17, the story of the race to 17, who gets it first? Who gets it, period? Orton or Cena? That could be interesting. As active as Randy Orton still is, there's a better chance that he gets there before John Cena does, regardless. And if he's still full-time and John Cena isn't, if John Cena's only coming back for, a one-off, Orton should be the one anyway to hit 17, if anybody's going to do it. But you can do that, whether it's WrestleMania 40, WrestleMania 41, whatever it is. That right there is an attraction that I think would be worthy of WrestleMania.